Hey guys, Mark W. Flockhart, and I just made a video about Farmers Insurance. They just announced recently, I think it was like 2 days ago, that they're officially stopping business in Florida completely. Now, I wanted to give you my background and my story because I did start my career off at Farmers, which is actually funny because this played out in my head that this may happen. So back in 2011, 12 years ago, yes, this was thought about, I started with a company called 21st Century. And 21st Century was the fastest moving, fastest growing, because Farmers was that sleeping bear. They didn't want to really wake up and start building a new company or building more business. They liked having the offices and having their agents and focusing on training and just really slow moving, right? They wanted the right type of business in Farmers. In the video, I mentioned some pieces about how they keep it shiny because that is the biggest thing. Farmers is really good at branding. And they are good at keeping the brand strong because if you look back last year, their J.D. Power ratings, they were like second. They were one of the best customer satisfaction companies around. Now, if you look at their sub companies, that's not the story. So that's how we felt when we were the 21st Century reps. I remember we were joking around in the office and said, man, we're just like the test dummy. Like they're taking 20 of us off the phone to go try this. They're bringing Farmers agents to see if they can teach them how to sell like we do. They're always just doing something different with that 21st Century brand. Lo and behold, they dissolved that whole brand very shortly after I left, and they only stayed in California. While they were doing that, I was actually on the exit when that was happening. They actually, from what I understand, I believe they were selling most of that book of the 21st Progressive. I think it was Geico. And Geico was purchasing it. So the way that it worked was if a customer called in, we were allowed to sell the Farmers brand if they were tagged a certain tag. So they picked and cherry picked the customers they wanted to keep. And if they weren't tagged that, we had to transfer them to this number, which was like a Geico number. And that allowed Geico to quote them, and they were allowed to essentially take over the business. They wouldn't let us requote them into the Foremost brand, which is going to be very different. I think the Florida issue, they're going to allow them to. They haven't announced anything there yet, but they did say that they're keeping those brands alive, just not the initial Farmers brand. So if you're new and don't understand the Farmers world, Zurich is the company that runs them. Everyone says they own them, but technically it's their finance company, right? If you're smart, you have a finance company, you have the sub companies, money flows into the finance. So if this one goes under, everybody else is protected. So Zurich is running Farmers and Bristol West and Foremost and all these sub companies. They probably have, I would guess, 30, 50, 100. I don't know. Most of these companies have a ton of LLCs. The other brands that are doing decent in Florida are the Foremost and the Bristol West. Those aren't bad companies because Florida is high risk, a higher risk, and that's where those guys shine. They're the progressive version of Farmers, right? They're middle line type business. I remember leaving there thinking like, okay, something's going to happen here. This isn't it. And it was a funny story because about 2 years ago, they bought MetLife. And it was weird because it was like, okay, they bought MetLife, but then they didn't do anything with it. They only kept the book and they stopped writing the business. So I didn't quite understand why they were doing that. And they essentially are technically dissolving MetLife. They're leaving it and it's there, but they're just holding on to the business. So what they did is they bought a fairly profitable option and they took some of their money and their assets and moved it into another company, which allowed them to pull some negative out of other places. Guess where those places are? Florida and California. Florida, they can now officially back out and say, whatever, we don't want our name to be tarnished because as we start fighting claims and as we have problems, I'd rather have my Foremost and my Bristol West brand just down here taking some of the punches and keep that Farmers brand nice and shiny. We're going to be the sleeping bear and we're going back to sleep. Let us know when it's time to wake back up. I think that's ingenious. They are very good at doing that. And if you don't see through all of the articles and understand, all anyone's talking about is, oh, there's 100,000 homeowners and what are they going to do? All these Farmers agents are out of business. They're hurting. Don't get me wrong. If you're a Farmers agent, leave me a comment below in Florida. I want to know like what your thoughts are and what your fears are, because I think there is some fear there that your main company is leaving you. Now, they usually don't because I got a feeling they're going to come back because they did file a rate increase on their auto. Even though they took the auto away, they still filed a rate increase, which means they hope to bring it back. At least that's my guess. They're going to essentially have the farmers agents sell life insurance heavily. They're going to focus on the Bristol West and the Foremost products, which actually aren't horrible from what I understand. Let me know in the comments below. But I don't think those are bad options because there aren't really good options in Florida anyways. Problem that you're going to run into is if you are a farmer's agent, everybody wants this book now. It's essentially shaken the industry in that state. So now what you think is safe probably isn't safe anymore. When you start quoting your current clients and non-renewing them, and Farmers sends that letter, if you don't get ahead of this, ahead of Farmers will start sending those letters out. And if your customers get those, they may just start shopping. They probably won't even care. They might start watching videos about it, reading articles about it. It's just a topic, right? My channel is covering it because it's a topic and it's popular. But I thought I had a really good perspective on that. Thought I'd share that at least to show you that this isn't my brand. This is a different channel, right? So as my business channel, I wanted you guys to understand, like, that's where I actually saw this happening. Not necessarily Florida specifically, but you could see every time Farmers has made a move, they've protected the Farmers brand and had these sub companies taking those hits for them. That story plays on a little bit further. So when I started in 2011, that's when they had this huge hiring. This was in Michigan, and they guaranteed Michigan that they were going to hire 1,400 jobs by 2027. Well, a few years later, they had to revamp that because they said they could only hire about 900 jobs because of the way the economy ended up out being, and their plans didn't work out the way they thought they would. They had this nice, huge building, but they really just couldn't get the people in the door to stay there. Part of it is because you literally feel like you're a robot and you're a number in the whole pool of people, and the supervisor that got hired before you doesn't have any experience, and they only wanted him because they would listen to what they said, and that was just the role. You tell him to do that, and you measure that and yell at them for that. And that's how a lot of those people, at least my coworkers, felt. I was a wild guy that just did what I did because I could sell, and no one really yelled at the guy that was selling. So I didn't have that bad of an experience, but I had a lot of people that said they did as well. And I saw that commonly with my coworkers. Now, what they're doing is also another strategic thing. So if you watch any of the videos on why all these companies are bringing people back to the office, it's not because they want them back in the office. Most companies are more productive. I think it was 3 to 5%, maybe even 15% on average, more productive for having the workers work from home. They're not paying all the time. They're not late. They're not doing this. They're not doing like slacking off. If you're monitoring it correctly and you have the right environment, then a lot of these employees are doing good. But if you're hurting and you need to lay people off, but if you lay people off, what are your investors going to do? What is all of the history? Like, your customers are going to lose faith in you a little bit. You're going to lose some clients because of that. Your investors are going to slow down and back off and say, wait a minute, let me take my money back, put it into a different investment that's stronger because you're hurting. I don't want my money sitting there. So what they're doing is they're calling people back in hopes that the people that come back are going to quit, at least 5 to 10% of them. That'd be perfect. Now they don't have to lay anybody off, or at least very few people off, because now they switched positions. They eliminated positions, not necessarily laid people off. That looks good to the industry, and it looks good on paper so that they didn't have to make that move. They just recently got a ton of flack for doing that. The people that are in the locations of the office have to go back to work 3 days a week at the farmer's building. Prediction at this point. So yes, they backed out of Florida. I think they're going to keep the other brands there. I got a feeling they're going to bring the auto back first, and then eventually the home once they get a feeling. It's probably going to be a few years would be my guess. They do love their agents because that was a huge staple. That's one of their pillars as they talk about. So agencies, brick and mortar, but I still think that's going to change. It's inevitable. I don't think that they can hold on to that long because why do Farmers when you can go independent? You now sell Allstate. You can sell Progressive. You can sell Safeco, which is Liberty Mutual. You can sell Nationwide. There's all these options that you have that are fighting you constantly. Going forward, they're not going to have as many agents that want to join them, especially when things like this happened. Why would I start a business in a state where you could literally just rip my business out from under me versus go independent, and now I have all these carriers behind me, and I lose one, big deal, I can go to the next and next, right? So that's like a thing for the younger generation in the next probably decade. But I think what's going to happen is you're going to see, I would say, at least 3 to 5 more states. If things don't turn around, we'll probably see like Louisiana drop out. We'll probably see California completely go out in that state. We'll probably see a couple other states that we don't see yet that are the problem childs, and that's the way for them to cut those costs out, is just stop the bleeding there. They're still going to have to go negative, borrow money. A lot of it depends on the reinsurance companies and what their deals and contracts are. So it's interesting to see how this is going to play out. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think I'm completely off my rocker? Or do you see what I'm seeing? The progression of where they're going and what their next steps are going to be. Let me know in the comments below. I'm Mark W. Flockhart. I'll see you soon.